Valhalla, Sapphic Pussy Rhapsody. Written by Fernando Damas. Illustrated by Merengue Doll. A Sukeban Games joint. Chapter 1. He's just a poor boy from a poor family. In a city that shouldn't exist. In a district that by extension also shouldn't exist. On a street whose signage was stolen to sell the metal it's made out of, and thus only exists in the collective knowledge of locals. Inside a house that most definitely exists. In a room whose usual cohabitant sometimes wonders if it keeps existing when she leaves its confines. There's a cat that, as far as he's concerned, very much exists way more than any of the above even. A black cat with very peculiar blue eyes, rather than the green its kind tends to have. A stray, or rather a former stray, a life of difficulty that's now the barest of memories in his unconcerned, present, biased brain. His earliest memory, probably carved there by the sharp contrast between the waves of terror and joy within, pits him against dogs with big mouths full of sharp teeth that could snatch him up in a single bite. His small lungs that were barely able to squeak out a meow to a mother long separated are now doing their best to emit growls to keep the snarling pack of enemies at bay. And then they all run. A round container, many times bigger than the stray, hits the ground and splashes water at the dog's feet, making a loud noise that scatters the threats and teeth and growls surrounding him, and in their place, a big cat? The stray had never seen anything like this before. It's like a cat, but bigger and different, standing on its hind legs. The giant cat looks at the stray for a long time, shakes its head, and begins to walk away. To the small stray, this is the closest thing to his mother that he's met since she went missing before the dogs, so he starts following the giant cat. Of course, with longer legs comes faster movement, longer strides that the stray's small legs can't keep up with. He starts meowing the way he called his mother. The giant cat stops, locking its dark red eyes with the stray's blue. Then the giant cat steps closer, and the stray feels it wrap a forepaw under his belly. He wasn't pulled by the back of his neck, but rather put in between the giant's paws. The stray liked this. The giant cat's body was very different, but just as soft and warm as his mother's body was. And after the stress he had just gone through, he was too exhausted to think much more about it. The giant cat brought him to a different place. A familiar place the stray would rarely, if ever, leave at all from then on. It wasn't as big as wherever he had been before, but that also meant he knew what everything was and where everything was. There was a small table at the center of everything, with its low legs and a warm box in the middle of its underside. This was the place where he liked to nap during the day, and under it was where his surrogate mother, his human, slept in the nights. The former stray loved to sleep under his human's chin as he had done with his birth mother before. Even if getting bigger and older meant that rolling in his sleep landed him on top of his human's face. She did make amusing noises as a result, though. There was also the window, a weird barrier where he could see things on the other side and yet was unable to cross. Through this window, he was also able to see when the light outside changed colors. And after one such shift in colors, the black cat wakes up from his nap slightly disoriented. He's on his table as usual, but the space the table is in is different. He sees completely different things. He smells and hears different things. As he wakes up further, he remembers that this indeed is not his familiar space. A long string of small changes ago, his human brought a lot of boxes. She looked distressed, but also, she brought boxes Oh, how joyful that period was. He remembers jumping into the boxes and being greeted with something new his human had put inside them each time. There was also a time he hid inside a box and eagerly awaited impressing his human with his skills in stealth and evasion. He was so skillful that he fell asleep undetected, then got hungry, then couldn't get back outside of his much too skillfully chosen hiding spot, and needed to yell until his human opened the box again. She did, and then gave him lots more food than usual, probably an apology for being unable to detect him inside the box when she sealed it. It was understandable, however. His human was sadly much worse at smelling and hunting compared to him, so he graciously accepted her apology. But after the time of fun boxes, the black cat found himself in the weird hard box his human used to move him to places outside his familiar space. Sometimes after the hard box, he would be in the space that smelled like urine. There'd be the loud human and the dog, and the human that smelled like a dog. Sometimes after the hard box, he would be on a cold, slippery table. A human very interested in his formidable hunting weapons would poke and prod him while showering him with admiration and gratitude that he chose patiently not to destroy them for their insolence. But after the hard box, he always returned to his familiar space with his familiar things, so he didn't know where he would be after this time inside the weird hard box. But he allowed his human to scoop him up with her forepaws just as she'd always done, and waited to return to his familiar space once again. He never saw his familiar space again. Now he was in a brand new space. It was bigger, wider, taller. The black cat could jump really hard here and not hit the ceiling or the lamp like he easily could before. There was also more spaces he can visit. The door is no longer locked, and if he pushes against the door, he can find more doors and more spaces. Sometimes he ventured and found the bigger, softer human that his human sometimes was in heat towards. Sometimes the small human with a frowning face would come in with two other small humans that smelled a bit like the big, soft human. He still doesn't know what everything is and where everything is, but the space where his human now sleeps, his room, is his new familiar space, especially compared to all the new spaces he now has regular access to. After all, this space still has his table and his smell. He likes the room, but he doesn't like how his human now sleeps in a different place. Instead of conveniently sleeping under the table with him, his human now sleeps on a taller, softer thing called a bed. The bed is a nice place, but it means the black cat has to move from his warm table to the top of the bed and then back again when he wants to sleep on his human's face. What a chore! But thus, after the stupor of sleep goes away and his brain shakes off the lingering confusion of waking up in an unfamiliar place, a new day for the black cat begins. Or rather, a new night. He always has a busy schedule. Water to drink, food to eat, fur to groom, poop to poop. So he stretches, lets out a deep yawn, and scans his surroundings to make sure everything is in order. There's the window, the bed, the TV, the cold food box, and also, what is that? Startled by something suddenly appearing without a sound where his human's bed should be, the black cat jumps before being able to get his legs out of their resting position. He falls off the table with a clumsy thump. A clumsy but completely calculated thump, obviously. The frantic flailing he just did was a tactical feint to distract and confuse the anomaly. He stands up and acts like nothing happened because nothing did happen. He jumps back up onto the table to see what caused him to improvise on the spot so that the surprise thing wouldn't feel too much shame for not surprising or startling him at all. After getting back on the table, he sees a familiar human, the window human, a familiar human that he knows his human likes, so the black cat lowers his guard. Much like how windows sometimes let him see the light change colors on the other side, windows also sometimes have very pale cats or humans inside them, even on the rare occasion that he can get to the other side of the window. The cats and humans simply vanish instead of being caught in his clever pouncing attacks. This peculiar window human is here, but like the weird phenomenon in the already weird phenomenon of windows, this human also isn't here. She was less like a door he could push with his face or paws, and more like a window where he can see things he can't touch, instead of feeling something cold or hard. If he ran to her, he would be able to pass right through her. His human would sometimes bring small, flat humans out of her pocket that were kinda like this. But the window human is different because she comes in even without the pocket window. The black cat looks up and locks eyes with the window human, who also raises a paw and just says, "Boo." Chapter 2. You think you can love me and leave me to die? Sorry, 4-boy. Did I wake you? Apologizing to the lone cat in this room, there was a girl. She was dressed in a black and purple sailor-style school uniform with a skirt worn over blue jeans. Her hair was short and brown, though it seemed to have a purple tint in certain lighting. Despite this dressing style, however, she was very clearly not a student or even of student age. She was old enough to not fool anyone at a school's entrance, but young enough to fool anyone going to a themed cafe. And only in such a themed cafe would those clothes be fitting, given that no school in the city used that style of uniform. Thus, rather than blending in with her surroundings, she stuck out like a sore thumb. Though even without the uniform as a factor, she still stuck out. For one, she was missing her right arm, causing her to tie the loose sleeve of her uniform into a neat knot near the shoulder. And also, probably even more evidently, she was slightly transparent. Kinda. She moved by gliding through space, sliding. Her form was one you could sometimes see through, sometimes not. Sometimes she was indistinguishable from a regular person, and other times it looked as if she was struggling to keep her shape. If there were such things as ghosts, she would have definitely passed as one. "Why is it so noisy in here today?" she said as she scanned for any other source of noise. But the only noise in the room aside from the ambient sounds of the city was the puzzled purr of her companion. "So you can see me!" exclaimed the girl excitedly at 4, the cat. "Look, just call me Anna. I'm not going to let the cat be called by name and not me," she then exclaimed to nobody in particular, before bringing her attention back to 4. "Back to 4? Is that a pun? Animals have always seemed to at least be aware I'm around," Anna continued as if trying to ignore something. "But I guess I just never had any particular animal I'd be around more than once. It's also the first time I'm alone with you, now that I think about it. Maybe you can see some light that humans can't? Kinda like those shrimps that see infrared? Mantis shrimp, was it?" she said while gliding side to side, amused by 4 following her movements with his head. "Or maybe it is true that pets can see ghosts?" she exclaimed, immediately wincing as she used the G word to refer to herself. "Actually, can you even see me properly?" Anna said, increasingly puzzled. "Maybe you don't see me as me, but as a shadow or something. Perhaps..." She started to get lost in thought. "Perhaps..." But then she started to grow increasingly annoyed. "Perhaps you can shut up if you can tell I'm annoyed. Can't you see I'm trying to talk with..." Anna caught what she just said, and then turned to 4, who was grooming his head, unaware of anything else in the world. Lick paw, groom head, lick paw, groom head, lick paw, groom head slightly more to the left. Anna watched 4 for half a minute in complete silence, as the weight of everything she got heated up about just now dawned on her. She then floated through the table and through 4, who tried to take a swipe at her skirt before imitating the act of sitting down at the table opposite 4.
"I don't like you,"
Anna exclaimed to nobody particular.
"No, not you 4. I meant—"
She then sighed, with her non-existent lungs letting out non-existent air.
"I wonder if your mom is secretly a cat. You were obviously born from a cat, but I mean, you're a human mom,"
Anna said to 4, who was absorbed in grooming his hind legs.
"I mean, it would explain how she can see me, for one. But there's something very cat-like about her, if you think about it. She carries herself with this cool, refined appearance, but you spend half a minute with her and she starts puking hairballs, running against doors, missing jumps, and chasing bright things."
Anna chuckled a little before finishing.
"I kid, obviously. She's not athletic enough to try to jump. Don't let those legs fool you. But there's, dunno, more?"
Anna stretched her non-existent arm muscles almost on cue with 4 as he stretched his legs before moving on to grooming his side.
"When you get her trust, you feel almost like you won the jackpot? Like you're in the select club of people Julianne Stingray will give the time of day. So, cat-like."
Anna crossed her non-existent arm in front of her and on top of the table, then feigned the motion of resting her head on a surface she could easily pass through.
"A complete pussy. A coward." "Meow!"
4 let out a loud meow in protest, like someone had pet him for a second too long. Did he understand Anna and was protesting the insult to his human? Whatever the case, it was enough to startle Anna into sitting upright. 4 then got up and left the table. Anna let out another dejected sigh from her non-existent lungs, but soon realized 4 was just going for a drink of water after he came right back to the table with droplets dribbling from his mouth. He resumed grooming himself, this time his front paws.
"I mean,"
she continued anyways, as if the cat understood her. Just in case.
"Sorry? I didn't mean it as an insult, though. And I'm not wrong. We're all cowards."
She mimicked the act of leaning back from the table, now posing as if she was supporting herself on the ground with her hand.
"Mimicked? Did I already mention I don't like you? Anyway, cowardice is the most natural thing you know, the most basic instinct ever. Bad thing happens, brain teaches you to avoid bad thing causer thing,"
said Anna in a sing-songy school teacher giving a practice lecture sort of tone.
"Running away from something that causes distress is cowardice, but also just a simple means of survival. But humans are the dumb animals that decide to ignore the basic common sense instinct. They dumbly repeat the bad thing again and again against all reasonable odds until they succeed."
As she said this, 4 stretched too much to reach a tricky spot and fell off the table again. He jumped back up and resumed grooming himself in the exact same position, where his center of mass teetered precariously over the edge of the table.
"Clearly not the only ones, though. Though I guess it's more complicated than that,"
she said, watching expectantly as 4 approached but never quite completely fell over the edge of the table.
"If you follow that survival instinct in a society, you end up alone. And when you're a social creature, that's hell on earth. And yet, it's what human brains are wired to do."
Anna relaxed a bit after 4 finally decided to move further away from the edge into the center of the table.
"The same function that teaches you to not touch the fire of a stove is the one that makes it feel it'd be easier to live in the woods away from everyone. And yet, who's the bigger fool? The one who keeps burning themselves at the stove, or the one who starves alone after being too afraid to set foot in the kitchen ever again?"
Anna got quiet for a second. 4, seemingly done with his grooming, stood up from the table and went to his food bowl.
"So when you can't avoid inevitable conflict, you develop a shield of some sort, right?"
Anna noticed, amused, that 4 liked to drop food on the floor before eating it, rather than just eating from the bowl.
"You just learn what part of you is vulnerable and build as much of a defense around it as you can. Just like your mom."
Upon saying this, 4 stopped eating and turned to lock eyes with Anna briefly before returning his attention to his food again. Perhaps the cat did understand some of what she said.
She presents herself in that caustic, potty-mouthed demeanor of hers. You think it's meant to push people away, but quite the opposite, I'd argue. You see, when you repress so much out of fear that it'll be used against you, you grow fearful that people will know you aren't being fully sincere.
Her tone turned academic again with a surprisingly natural ease as she spoke to the eating cat.
So you create this hyperreal version of sincerity to coat yourself in. After all, if you're so aggressively straightforward, so foul-mouthed when expressing yourself, you're being as sincere as you can be, right? You couldn't possibly be hiding anything, right?
Then a beat of silence, measured out carefully as if delivering a scripted monologue before an audience.
Ha!
The loud exclamation made Four turn around to Anna.
Sorry, keep eating, don't mind me. But yeah, it doesn't fool anyone at all. Everyone can see right through it, and I don't think your mom even pretends that it works anymore.
As she said this, Four went back to the table to groom himself again, this time to clean the results of his meal.
But what can she do? That's the only way she knows how to defend herself.
Anna went quiet again, but rather than collecting her thoughts, it was more like she was finding the strength to say something deeply buried within herself to her feline partner.
Do you really have to describe everything?
She exclaimed, annoyed at nobody in particular, and seemed about to say something else until she saw Four's bemused face.
But you know, even if people can see right through it, that's what friends are for, aren't they?
Right as she said this, she laid on the floor, prompting Four to look over the edge of the table, as if she was keeping track of her and the conversation.
You learn how to put up your walls to protect yourself from the world, but then comes along people who can see right through them, even go out of their way to climb right over all your hard work just to be with you.
A brief but noticeable pause.
I had someone like that once.
Anna got lost in a familiar train of thought for a moment. She tried to push it away with every ounce of her mental fortitude, but it had become harder and harder to leave this train of thought as a problem for another day as time passed. Today, she felt like this train of thought was barreling towards her, while she could only stand helpless in its path. She then sat back up again, prompting Four to leap out of the way of the intangible girl.
Your mom's a lucky girl. I mean, for one, she has a nice boy like you to keep her company. And for another, she can see me in all my glory.
Anna let out a bitter chuckle before continuing.
But also, she's surrounded by so many nice peeps. The titty hacker, her boss, that one guy that's always at the bar also, the bougie cat girl, the one with the blue hair, Becky.
Anna counted the peeps with her one hand as she named them, and was going to continue on, but she'd already run out of fingers. She'd even produced an extra finger so as not to leave Becky out, and growing more fingers just felt excessive for the point she was trying to make. Anna shook her hand as if she was flicking some water off of it, and the extra finger was no more.
Anyway, if she really was trying to push people away, she's amazingly horrible at it. She's surrounded by too many decent people. No, she didn't push them away. She took a gamble, showed them where it hurt, and they actually helped her with her wounds.
The bitterness in Anna's voice increased with every word.
Lucky her. I'm so jealous.
Those last words lingered in her mouth. They were said with every attempt at irony and sarcasm, but they stirred something inside of her, something she was trying to push back in, but couldn't. It was already out, and trying to keep the gates closed was becoming harder and harder.
It's the logical thing, right? You interact with certain types of people, you grow yourself up as a certain type of person as a result. You can share the joys of the good, the burdens of the bad. You know, if you trip, someone will be there to help you stand back up.
Anna started talking faster and faster with each word, as if she'd grown tired of trying to keep them in and was spitting them out of her mouth.
Face someone that hurt you and come to terms with how you hurt them, too. Offer a kind ear to folks that don't have one when they need it most. Take a chance in your lowest moment and realize you aren't as alone as you thought you were.
She was still speaking quickly, but now it sounded like she was mocking some cliché platitudes.
Oh boy, having friends is so nice.
She didn't spit these words out. It was more like she was savoring the bitterness they were soaked in. A moment of indulgent confession in front of a non-human witness more interested in watching her movements than in attempting to comprehend her speech. Nobody of importance heard her. Nobody who could have understood what she said, let alone taken issue with any of it, was aware she was here uttering these words at all. She was free to say whatever she liked with no consequence or effect on anything at all. And that was the most galling thing to her. The very reason she had an endless well of bitterness and sorrow inside. Even if she were to acknowledge it was there, what would it change? Perhaps that's why she decided to have this little heart-to-heart with her feline companion. The fact that he could at least see her was more interactivity than she usually got, at least with someone she didn't have to measure her every move with. In that instant, Anna let out her third dejected sigh of the night, and even if there wasn't any air leaving her non-existent lungs, something did seem to leave her as she sighed. Her eyes, which always seemed to be smirking mischievously at everything on their own, lost their luster. Her shoulders slumped, the muscles on her face relaxed. Minute changes that would be indistinguishable from the usual rippled across her form until there was a noticeable shift in her body language as a whole. The bitterness that had only bubbled up inadvertently at first was boiling at the surface now, fully revealed.
You know,
with a shift in attitude also came a disregard for appearances and decorum. She began to float and spin around the room while still in the sitting position.
My life was so much easier before meeting your mom. Sure, I don't know a single godforsaken thing about why I'm like this.
She looked at and threw her one hand.
But at least I knew some things to be a fact. I get out of the hospital. I cross the street. I look back to where Mom is, only to see a truck had crashed right where I just was. I think, damn, I'm sure lucky. Wouldn't that have been the shittiest thing, to get hit right out of the hospital doors like that? But then, wouldn't you know it, that's me! That's my body right under that tire.
Despite the clear and unpleasant shift in mood, Four was clearly excited and amused. He began jumping and leaping to catch Anna as she floated around the room.
So I scream and cry and pray and beg, but Mom can't see or hear me.
She recollected her own death with a flat and tired voice, like reciting song lyrics without the music meant to accompany them.
So I assume this is my reality now, right? A fly on the wall of the world? I can be anywhere? And for some reason, electronic devices are now also like rooms I can enter, which is really hard to explain how that feels, now that I think about it. It just comes as naturally as opening a door. And then...
She stopped dead in the air as if to emphasize those words, causing Ford to overshoot a jump.
And then I entered this bar I hadn't seen before, and by the tits of the holy cow, the cutie at the counter can see me. And man, now I wish she couldn't. I mean, it was euphoric that I was able to speak to another human for the first time in years.
Anna resumed floating, this time lying down, yet still in midair, spinning along 3 different axes, as if strapped to an invisible gyroscope.
But now the one thing I know to be a fact is no longer so. The one constant I took solace in was apparently just a huge false positive. And now, well, I decided to go to the Apollo Bank when it all went to hell to check on things, and oh, look at that. Someone there can actually see me. And I can't just let that blue-haired girl fend for herself in such a mess, can I?
Her floating slowed for a second as something came to her.
Blue hair. Nah, what are the chances?
Her floating resumed her pace as she continued.
Then there's Becky, oh my sweet little Becky, the sister I never got to meet. How many times have I wanted to talk to you, to hug you, and now that you can apparently at the very least hear me, I seriously wish you couldn't.
Four was clearly exhausted from trying to catch the floating human form and flopped to the ground on his side. He continued lazily swiping his paws at the air to make sure everyone knew he was a formidable hunter. Anna obligingly lowered the height of her meandering floating about the room, allowing For's paws to pass through the ends of her skirt every now and then.
She can apparently hear me nowadays, and that sucks. I can't watch her from a distance like I used to either, because she can now see if I change something too,
she continued.
And now that I might be able to talk to her, what would I even say? Hello, this is kind of sudden, but I'm your sister that died in a gruesome case of vehicular manslaughter before you were deployed. But more importantly, do you prefer Kira Miki or B-Link? So not only is the one thing I knew as fact now a total lie, but now it feels like people have gradually been able to see me more and more for reasons that escape me and my control.
The speed at which Anna glided across the room seemed to ebb and flow in conjunction with her thoughts.
Which then makes you wonder, why now? Why not before? Why isolate me like this for years? What changed?
Anna let out a deeply frustrated groan as she came to a complete rest against the ground, completely exhausted by all the flying and thinking and talking. The effect made it seem as if she had literally deflated. For decided to get up from his own tired and deflated position and took a few steps to join Anna in lying on the floor on their sides. Despite the bitter aftertaste of everything she'd just let loose, Anna still smiled as the cat diligently continued listening to her woes.
There's something about you, boy,
she said. She extended her one hand towards him and immediately regretted her inability to pet him.
You just make a girl want to pour her heart out to you, don't you? Like mother, like son, I guess,
she then uttered under her breath, in a tone less charitable or flattering than the one directed at the cat. And then, she laid there in complete and uncharacteristic silence and stillness. Minute after minute passed with Anna only staring at the ceiling, as diligently still as For was by her side. She was mentally exhausted. She didn't like how some of her bottled up and completely pointless grievances about some kind of weird Schrödinger cyber ghost had just come out like that. She especially didn't like how many more were still lurking inside, wanting to come out, waiting to come out, now that the floodgates had opened. And deep within the endless well of dark bitterness inside her was a particularly dense nugget of undeniable grief. More than her oh-so-predictable mid-afterlife crisis, more than the existential questions brought forth by the shifting nature of her perceivability or lack thereof, more than any loneliness or boredom or anger or sadness she had, the last thing she wanted to think about was those memories of her. She knew by repressing these memories, she was denying herself a lot of her most precious moments, in this life and her previous one. But she was also sparing herself the pain associated with their recollection as well. One time, months ago, in her first encounter with For's human, Anna made a mistake of bringing her up. It was a moment of weakness, a door she never wanted opened, and yet she'd opened it up anyway. It was so casual, and yet the moment her name left Anna's lips, she realized her mistake. It took an insane amount of mental energy to push everything back in. She was so drained that despite wanting to visit For's human again, she decided against it until she could gather her composure again, an effort that easily took the better part of a couple of weeks.
Told you, didn't I?
Anna said to nobody in particular.
We're all cowards. I should know. Takes one to know one.
More minutes passed. Suddenly, For stood and went to the door, meowing loudly. Anna turned to watch, wondering what the cat wanted. The door of the room was soon opened by For's human coming back from her shift at work. Chapter 3. A Devil Set Aside for Me. Her dark hair, which was usually neatly tied into twin-tails, was loose around her shoulders, as was her necktie. She'd already slipped her shoes and jacket off, and was already unzipping her pencil skirt as For began rubbing himself against her legs. She glanced up and made eye contact with Anna as her skirt hung precariously from her hips. The face of For's human soon went through a rapid mix of awareness, surprise, and apprehension. She knew exactly what to expect from this particular unexpected guest. Anna, however, was going through quite a different series of expressions and emotions. Her eyes regained their luster, her shoulders straightened, the muscles in her face lifted her cheeks into a smile. And smile she did, because after crying her heart out to a cat, there was something deeply reassuring about how the mere presence of For's human before her could inspire such an easy transformation. It was a simple reminder that the defense mechanisms people grew to protect themselves were as much a part of them as the weaknesses they were built to protect. In other words, Anna felt a self-affirming and all-encompassing desire to tease the hell out of somebody. The smile curled further into a grin as Anna noticed For's human become aware of her own state of undress in front of a painfully human spectator.
Well, well, well,
Anna exclaimed. Her voice was full of mischief and didn't betray a hint of the bitter melancholy it held only a few minutes ago. She adjusted herself into a more seductive position, lying on the middle of the floor.
I'm glad you're so eager today, Joe. You left me waiting all by my lonesome here for way too long. How are you gonna make it up to me?